So good morning. Sorry, a little bit weird when I hear everybody else, but not you. I'm going to build upon a little bit of a discussion that we had on variance orders and talk a little bit more about commercial construction management, specifically managing changes. As identified, I'm Dr. Sean Regan. I'm currently based out of California. I'm a general contractor. Also do real estate investment, residential care facilities, oil and gas, nuclear. So I've done about $80 billion worth of work, as mentioned, and I've done it in Saudi Arabia. I've lived here 4 times. I've done Iraq, Dubai, Kuwait, Russia, Algeria. I go to all the beautiful places, where construction works. So what we're going to talk about today is contract development and basically the templates that we can utilize, contract execution, contracts variance order and change, claim development, key performance indicators, claim submittal, and claim tracking and monitoring. These are the biggest areas of functional support that tended to be, to be honest, ignored on most projects. I'm currently training 400 engineers for a leading Saudi engineering contractor, and 80% of the people have literally responsibility for the contract, and they have no understanding of what their total relation is. They only understand their narrow window. And so what we're trying to do is expand and build onto that. The last aspect that I try to address a little bit, it's what I do in Nigeria quite a lot lately. It's value for money audits. We look at projects that were completed and go back and determine what was good and what was bad, so that we can get them and produce a more economically viable project. Because oil and gas in Nigeria is very much like here. It's owned by the state. So they develop their budgets, coffers, and payments from that item. So in contract development, we look at the fact that project planning is one of our key aspects. It basically consists of the integration and identification of the people and party that are going to work on the contract. We look at the fact of what stakeholders and sponsors are going to do, and we build upon stakeholders. Everybody who participates in the contract is a stakeholder. There's a fallacy that only the owner or only the contractor is a stakeholder. It's every individual group that participates on the contract and how we can utilize them. And we do that by developing a planning session. So a lot of the skill sets that I'm talking about are interrelated between PMI, IPMA, CMAA, AACE, based upon the different classifications. Each one is an expert of their different parts, and as we go through. The key point of establishing a planning process is that we're reviewing the people and processes, decomposition with the WBS, organizational breakdown structure, not an org chart, but the roles and responsibilities of which we're working on. And in addition, we start basically establishing how we're going to do cost accounts and work packages. So we focus on planning on the long term. Then we basically jump into our risk, our contingency, and then one of the big things I'm pushing is I push the PDRI, Project Distribution Rating Index, because I want to see if the team is understanding the interrelationships between engineering, procurement, and construction, and even between the disciplines. So by pushing that planning process, we have found that projects that we introduce PDRIs on with risk, with a diligent planning, we tend to find that our projects run less than 10% change orders. They're generally within plus or minus three months of schedule, and they're generally under 10% of cost overrun. The projects that do not follow that tend to run 70% over budget, 30% change order, and 40 to 50% behind schedule. So we have viable proof that's collected by University of Texas, shared by 125 of the top clients and construction companies in the world. That's a sound basis to build on. It's not just an opinion, it's basically fact. We basically need to focus in planning. One of the biggest issues is determining scope. Scope is basically broad-based. It may be a simple paragraph, but when you decompose it, the scope becomes broad-based. It expands. And we tend to miss that when we don't have integrated planning. We also need to integrate the client requirements. Some of the key things, the client may want it done on another date, but as a general contractor, I'm going to cut their schedule by 3 months to build myself some float. I'm going to put money on contingency for the risks that are coming. And this is the process doing it. If you don't do it at this phase, you're never going to be able to do it. You're going to be a dog chasing your tail. You're always going backwards trying to collect and go through. I also look at the schedule hierarchy. We generally have an executive level schedule, a summary, and a detail, and then we have working. So all of these tasks are within the PMBOK and the TCM framework. The divisions of responsibility, by making them clear and concise. A project manager who is running everything by himself and making decisions is not a project manager. It's counterproductive. Yet we find that 70% of project managers will utilize the dictatorial style of control. If you're doing that, why are you hiring subject matter experts in engineering, procurement, and construction to do that work? Your job as a project manager is political. You are looking at the strategic level of the project to successfully bring it up to the client, not the tactical level that the team basically works on. And then in the final aspect, again, the program project plan review, and the last part, approval. How many schedules have you ever worked on or seen that the only person who signed off on the schedule is the project manager? Not the engineer, civil, mechanical, electrical, not the procurement, not the constructability, just the project manager. That is basically an issue because that means you're not integrating into your team. And that leads us into variances and potential changes. So in our contract execution, we just look at a standard life cycle. We authorize, or not authorize, author, and then we basically negotiate, approve, execute, review obligations and payments, compliance, renewals, and requests. So the cycle goes from the beginning of the project, and then if you're running like EVM, you're doing it monthly. So every month you've gone back and reviewed and built upon your program. So we look at, in the planning, how we identified the work, clear, concise, legitimate. That's why we have a WBS, OBS, and a dictionary so that we can relate those aspects. We also look at the fact that the planning is, to me, the most critical aspect. It's generally seen that if you spend 70% of the time of your plan developing the plan and integrated with the team, you're going to be successful. What happens is as we start chipping away and decreasing planning, and we try to put emphasis on schedule and cost collection, we're missing our targets. So generally, I look at 70% planning, 10% update and maintenance, and 20% change, review, and updates on progress. One of the best data that we have, of course, is historical data. And again, one of the problems we tend to see in companies, 70% of companies, they complete the project and they walk away. They don't go back and do the final historical cleanup. That's accounting's problem. So let them go do it. And we're not getting the true basis of the numbers. So as such, we're not able to update our historical data. So if we were good or bad on the project, the second project, we're not taking advantage of that. We need to collect our historical data, and that's done through potential changes and variances that may or may not become a change order, but they're identifying trends and how we're going to go through. The type of projects, is basically either the type of contract or the scope. You may have oil and gas, nuclear, capital construction, airports, transportation. I've worked in all the fields. It's similarly represented, but the key aspect is how we did the work and the type. Lump sum, unit price, cost reimbursable, time and material. Half the time we basically have a problem in the contract. We have the wrong contract type to the wrong work. We put lump sum contracts together on projects that have 20% design. That's a guaranteed failure. A lump sum contract has change orders. If it deviates from the work that you originally prescribed, you're going to have a change order. You cannot say that lump sums have no change because it's not viable. I tend to use the FIDIC contracts because they're internationally based, the language is tested, and everybody understands them. I have more fun when somebody writes their own contracts because when I get a contract written by a contractor, I'm doing change orders from the second I see the contract. There are companies, there's an Italian company who shall remain nameless. They have more people working on change orders than actually developing the contracts. They have two buildings in downtown Rome, buildings completely full with people doing change orders on the contracts. That's where they make their money. And so we basically need to focus on the types of contracts and the methods and the breakdowns. Locations will dictate different ones. If you do contracts in the US, you tend to see a different form of contract, but the FIDIC is now getting in. You also need to look at the language of the contract. I've had contracts managed in English, but written in Arabic and French. You cannot get more confusing language than literally left to right, right to left, and a different dialect and language. But it's doable. You just have to come up with a means and method to align to it. Labor cost is one of our biggest issues right now. I was just having a discussion about a performance group. It takes 1.4 hours on average to engineer a document in India versus the UK or the US. But in the UK, I pay £60. In the US, I pay $90. And in India, I pay $4. So I expend a lot more hours. And those are those low-cost engineering efficiency centers. But the issue comes up is that hours are useless right now because the labor rates are different. So you need to basically be able to work with your labor, but also look at the functionality of the construction. One of our biggest issues in construction that I've seen for the past 4 years, starting during COVID and getting worse, kids don't want to be in the trades anymore. They play games. They have no physical desire to go out and do work. Our skilled craft in welding, pipe, and electrical and terminations have gotten older, and they're resigning, quitting, and just working out. And so we have a massive labor shortage of skilled labor around the world on our projects. The project teams, again, a team is not one person dictating to everybody. A team is everybody participating. Best one I ever had is the project manager didn't bring in the administrative staff. We had no copy machines, no paper, and he got to fly economy in the back of the plane for about a year because he didn't bring in the person who controls his tickets, his travel, his buses, all the office, all the computers. He forgot all that. So when I do a team, I bring everybody in because it's the person who basically is behind you doing all the work that generally has all the answers. And then lastly, we're looking at continually our constructability methods and means and how they're performing. So when we look at the contracts, it's the input and data. We have our contract requirements. We have the types of contracts, as I mentioned, how we're going to deliver the contracts, supply chain, our biggest issue, and now about to get hit again. U.S., basically all the dock workers just want to go on strike again. Well, we just had that in France and we just had it in Germany. They protested because of the pensions. Everything's late by weeks, and it's now becoming months to years. The different stakeholders that I discussed in the beginning, the different agendas that stakeholders have. Everybody has an agenda. And we need to basically work out to resolve their issues and their risk. So all of these are the steps that we generally need to look at in the execution requirements. And the key thing we do with that is we look at the awareness. Oops. Guess the pointer doesn't want to work. We look at the awareness, the evaluation, the specification, and the purchase. These are generally the inputs that we try to work through on the program. In contract change, which supports variance. Variance orders are preliminary notification that we're going to do work. I have my team write variances on everything, and then we evaluate them for potential changes. We look at our hard costs and our soft costs. The hard costs, basically general site conditions, identification, earthworks. Soft cost is our design, support, engineering, and review. So we try to look at that. The biggest thing that's happened lately, third-party reviews. I wouldn't have a profession if it wasn't third-party reviews right now, because construction was down, but reviews went up. So as I said, these are how we start building in the reviews, like a FIDIC review or PDRI. But the other big one, as I mentioned, are value for money audits. Very important nowadays in looking at, it was planned to be $5 million. It cost $10 million. Why did it cost $10 million? One of the biggest ones that I found is that overruns have been coming more and more in the soft cost, not the hard cost. They didn't plan, or they keep their overheads at 10 or 15%, but in reviews and support, they're spending literally thousands of hours doing the contract when they only budgeted 100. So their soft costs are running 40 to 50% when they should be 15. The big thing that comes up with all this and looking at it is it helps us establish a claim. Claims are not negative. Everybody has a fear that claims are bad, change are bad. No, claims are items that have been identified. Sometimes they work on changing the process. They work on building. They don't necessarily have an economic or schedule impact. So we look at the different stages and participants of the program. Consultants, contractors, and third parties generally are the ones that produce the most claims. Why? Because generally they have the most broad and open scope of work that we're trying to get through. When you have a lot of tenders or reviews in procurement to go through, you are open up to a lot of opportunities of potential claim. So procurement is one of the biggest areas, especially right now. 2 years ago, it started really changing because of COVID, and it hasn't adjusted. Every industry that I know of in a construction general building right now, my prices are good for 7 days. I used to get prices for 90 days. I ordered a bunch of glass for a project for doing rails, so replacing wood rails with glass. Why? The glass was 70% cheaper than wood. And the glass doesn't warp, bend, or like that. The quality of the wood products worldwide is down. The quality of materials are down. So glass has gone up 6 times once every 2 months for the past year. So that has a major impact. So our materials and tenders have to be re-reviewed. That's leading to a lot of claims and functional balances. This requires a lot of coordination. And yet, again, it's an area where people ignore. They have one contracts officer and they have a project controls person trying to run change, cost, monthly reporting, performance, and they're one person. So we're not responding into the changes in the market that have come up for coordination. Due to timing and logistics and supply chain, we have a lot of overlaps right now, and we have a lot of delays. So how do you compensate? Well, the biggest compensation we've been doing is I'm using pre-engineered steel buildings. Where I used to build houses out of wood, and product, I'm actually building them out of pre-engineered steel buildings. They come in a kit, they're easier, they're engineered, and the material is stable on the price. The price is held once you place the order. You don't get that on any other material. We also look at shared liabilities. It's not just the contractor's fault. It's not just the supplier. The owner needs to sort of step up and realize there's change. If you try to maintain in the way the orders are, we're going to run into a problem. So in the end, we have a few little aspects on it, but the result, again, are these claims and types. I got about a minute, so I'm sorry. KPIs, just try to focus on them. People overdo the most important part about KPIs is if you have them, use them. People establish KPIs and they ignore them. That's generally the thing. The most important part about KPIs is we have a duty to mitigate, and we have limitations of liability we want to worry about. We get conflicts of interest on KPIs, and we generally have third parties. Like especially I used to build, well, still do, casinos in Las Vegas. So I have casino, hotel, recreation, restaurant. I have overlapping responsibilities, but everything's driven by the casino. They want to open and have a big event because that is what's going to make money. So we try to look at them. So when we look at KPIs, it's just having a basically assessment. And again, as I close out, these are just some risk and typical claims that we get between the risk, the contractor, and the employer. So most important aspect is issues. When there's a dispute, we try to skip steps, as I mentioned, trying to enforce the contract and trying to form reliability. We usually look at the fact that disputes, basically budget and claims, is one of the biggest issues. So my apologies. I got to jump through real quick. If anybody liked the presentation, send an email. This was a teaser. But I guess there's a chance for questions, somebody said, or not. And as I said, the value for money audits, I tend to look at basically change of regulations, types, and scopes. Is there questions or not? I can't remember. And this is sort of the master document SWOT analysis that I utilize for viability and claims. So here's my contact information. Apologize if I went over a little bit trying to adjust, but be happy to share the presentation and answer any questions. If you care to send me a note, I tend to respond fairly quickly, except for tonight when I fly back to California.
Dr. Sean Regan, it was really informative presentation. We really enjoy having you with us today. So on behalf of PMI KSA chapter, we would like to thank you and express our gratitude for you coming up here, giving from your time and expertise and sharing the knowledge with the young Saudis and all people coming from around the world. So thank you so much. And this is a very simple trophy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, yes, please. Oh.